Last time, we took a look at the P-51 Mustang. This time, another iconic American vehicle from the World War II, the M4 Sherman Tank. Now, the Sherman was, from a technological standpoint, outmatched by the German panzers that it faced in Europe. Panzer IV, Panther, Tiger Tank. Any one of these had the Sherman outmatched in firepower and armor. But the Sherman had a significant advantage over the enemy: numbers. With 50,000 Shermans produced in the course of the war, they could replace their losses easily. For every Sherman that was knocked out, there were 10 more waiting to take its place. When a German tank was knocked out, there were not any replacements coming for it. In the past 16 years, I've built more Shermans than I have of any other kind of model tank. Usually one about every 2 or 3 years. This is the first Sherman that I built back around 2006. And as you can see, it's not actually done yet. 14 years later. Why is that? The treads. Good grief, do they have to make every individual track link separate? In the last 15 or so years, I have never had the patience to actually finish these. A quick look at the muzzle brake shows that this is the 76mm high-velocity cannon, which, unlike the lower-velocity 75 that most Shermans were equipped with, could actually damage some German armor. After all the times that I've repainted this thing over the years, this is pretty much the only indication that this tank belongs to the Polish 1st Armored Division that fought in Normandy in 1944. They were equipped with Sherman tanks that the British had previously acquired through the Lend-Lease program. This was a very nice kit from Dragon Models. It included a lot of photo-etched metal pieces, as well as an optional metallic gun barrel. Really, the main reason it looks like such a piece of junk now is because when I built it I was 14, had no experience as a modeler, and just didn't know what I was doing with it. Another one from Dragon Models. This is a unique British modification, the Firefly. Just compare the 17-pounder to a regular 75mm cannon. That thing is huge. It's so big that the only way they could make enough room was to take out the radio and place it in a bustle on the rear of the turret. With the 17-pounder cannon, the Firefly could consistently kill Tiger tanks in a single shot, even at long range. In another side-by-side comparison, you can see here where the Firefly had the bow gunner's position removed to allow for the storage of extra ammunition for the 17-pounder cannon. Now, unlike the previous Sherman, the Firefly's treads were just a single loop of rubber. The only reason this one is incomplete is because about 3 years ago I moved to a new house and I misplaced some of the pieces in the process. And the instruction manual. It's going to be pretty tricky to put that together until I can find where those went. Believe it or not, this kit was actually produced by Testors. Yes, the paint manufacturer. Now, to be honest, I suspect this may be a repackaged Italeri kit. Maybe they struck a deal or something. Anyways, this Sherman is in service with the Free French 2nd Armored Division in Normandy. Apparently, they were part of Operation Cobra in the Normandy breakout. Zu Lieutenant d'Archanges, mort pour la France. As far as I can tell, this translates to Junior Lieutenant d'Archanges, died for France. So my best guess would be This was written on the tank to honor a platoon or a company commander who was killed during the fighting in Normandy. A few things to notice from this angle. First, towards the front of the hull, that blue and white circle is the emblem of the Free French 2nd Armored Division. Second, it's modeled with the pistol port wide open. Third, the pintle mount for the machine gun and some of the antenna brackets have been knocked off at some point. And fourth, the turret is actually glued in place. This is literally the only model tank I've built where I've done that. This one is a Revel kit. It's in a slightly different scale from the others. This one is 1:32, everything else is 1:35. It's not a very noticeable difference unless you hold them right next to each other. Now this is kind of an interesting kit. It had some interesting additions that I haven't seen on any others. Well, for starters, it's got the sandbags that are mounted all around the hull, and the wood planking mounted on the turret, I guess to break up the outline, so a sort of a camouflage scheme. And it has the hedge cutters on the front that were adapted during the Battle of Normandy. But for all of its interesting innovations, this wasn't a particularly good kit. Well, this is about as clear as I can make it, and it still isn't showing up very well. But the two halves of the gun barrel just are not aligned properly. And no matter what I did, I couldn't get them to match up. Also, this thing used to have treads, and the idler wheel at the back. Problem is, it was a pretty loose fit, and the treads were actually much too large for this. So they just kept falling off, and after a while I got tired of having to put it back on. Now, according to the box, this tank was part of a battalion that fought in the Battle of the Bulge under the command of one Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams. Yes, that Creighton Abrams. These last three are from Tamiya. They're not as finely detailed as the Dragon kits, but they still provide a decent challenge. I would recommend these for beginners, and just to modelers in general. I have rarely been disappointed by a Tamiya kit. Now, this is one of my favorite projects that I've worked on. This tank I built to represent the African-American 761st Tank Battalion, also known as Patton's Panthers. And yes, I do have a General Patton to go along with them, as well as Eisenhower and Montgomery for good measure. Actually, this was one of the projects that led to me focusing more on actually building the tank crews. At the time, I'd recently read a book about the 761st Tank Battalion, and I felt inspired to make a vehicle representing their unit. And it didn't seem sufficient to just build the vehicle. I wanted to show the crew as well. Now, I don't really have the time to get into their history here, but you should absolutely look this up when you have the time. Now, this tank from the 6th Armored Division is not particularly noteworthy. All I can really say about it is that by the time I got around to it, I was a lot better at being more accurate in where I placed the markings. I will say that a lot of tank commanders preferred to fight while standing out of the hatch. See, when they're buttoned up inside the turret, and all they've got to look through is those periscopes, that does not present an adequate view of the battlefield. So, the commander is at more risk, but the tank as a whole is a lot safer, since there's somebody on the outside who knows what's around the tank. And finally, we have one of my favorite projects, the M4 A3E8, better known as the Easy 8. Now, if you've seen the movie Fury, this is the one that Brad Pitt was using. Actually, that last tank duel from Fury should have been over a lot quicker. The EZ-8 carried a high-velocity 76mm cannon, which could, in fact, penetrate the frontal armor of a Tiger tank from normal combat ranges. The EZ-8 also had a wider set of treads and wheels than the standard Sherman to compensate for the heavier weight from the 76. Now, one reason this is my favorite Sherman project is because it was the first time that I actually used a weathering kit. I think I've done a pretty good job making it look like this thing drove through a couple of mud puddles. The EZ-8 was introduced very late in 1944, towards the onset of winter. And that may also be the reason why that star is black instead of white. You know, to help it stand out better against the snow. I made sure to do the top of the tank and the turret as well. Lots of muddy footprints where the crew has been walking around to get into the hatches. So, that was the M4 Sherman Tank. Next time, some lighter fare. The M3 and M5 series Stuart tanks.